Good morning, everyone. And nice, as always, to be with you. This has been such a very interesting cycle of my life because when this COVID started a year and a half ago, and I was confined to quarters and just also had a great sense of urgency about passing out to people some uplifting, positive ideas because we were all a little freaked out about everything that was happening. I imagine this to be like these morning broadcasts would be like something I'd do for weeks, maybe a month or two. So a year and a half later. And I have to say that these 9 a.m. broadcasts, I've never done anything in all my years that has been so enthusiastically received and so consistently appreciated. So it's been just very interesting. So here I am, and I'm still here. And because the epidemic keeps finding new ways to challenge our equanimity, we just keep working with it. And I deeply appreciate what I would call the relationships that's been formed by my having coffee with all of you in the mornings. And I'm very glad to be here. So today is also Monday, and Monday is the day that I remind you all that at this time, the mission of the Masters, which is the impersonal name I've given the work I do, is supported by those of you who appreciate it. And you can sign up on an ongoing basis through Patreon. And also, many of you have chosen to come directly. I'm about to make a shift on this because even though this is primarily me doing this work, I've set up a nonprofit corporation called Mission of the Masters, and I'm needing to sort of, for legal and tax reasons, I need to shift everything over to that. So I haven't yet, but I'm going to probably today make a Mission of the Masters on PayPal and just start shifting things over that way. So those of you who've been choosing to donate directly, it's going to shift from being Asha and Nayaswami to Mission of the Masters, because this isn't personal. This is really, I'm doing it for that sake. And it's important to me. The tax reasons and so on are really quite incidental. It's only that once you get into something like this, for the first time in my life, I actually have to think about this sort of thing, because I have been very fortunate that other people have always thought it through for me. But I'm also trying to become a grown-up and just understand the flow of energy and the flow of money. And so we've all been learning together on this. I'll be more specific next week or when I get a little straightened out. But in the meantime, deeply grateful. More than in the meantime, just deeply grateful. It's been very, it's really not, it's about all of you responding to the prayer that I've offered to Divine Mother, which is, what should I do with the rest of my life? How should I carry it on? How, what is your will for me? And the support that you all have shown has helped me on a deeper level to realize that I'm on the right track, doing the right thing. It's not that I actually have doubted, because this is what I was born to do, but it's always good to continually ask. And it's always very nice to have that, that prayer answered. And that's what you all have been. And I'm very grateful. So let's pray together and go on with our story today. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence always living within us. Show us by our own experience that time and space and death and life are no obstacles to the communion of souls on the spiritual level. Make it clear to us how we should live, where we should go, what we should do, and give us the strength when doubts and obstacles and loneliness and disappointment assail us, as they assail everyone. Help us to feel underneath all of that your guiding presence, that we may weather the storms, learn our lessons, and emerge victorious on the other side. We are your very own. Receive us. Om. Peace. Amen. Last week, you all don't see these on a weekly basis, but I do 4 programs and then I have 3 days off. Excuse me. I'm on Article 13, which is the membership vows. And as Swami says, there's longer vows, which I'm about to read, but there are 4 basic principles that define the Ananda monastic order and the Ananda way of life. And so now I'm going to start with the first of them, which is simplicity. Simplicity at Ananda is not defined as poverty. It is defined rather as reducing one's wants so that material things do not intrude on one's inner freedom, but rather in the context of whatever needs to be done, facilitate that freedom. I'm going to read that again because it's a great sentence. Simplicity at Ananda is not defined as poverty. It is defined rather as reducing one's wants so that material things do not intrude on one's inner freedom, but rather in the context of whatever needs to be done, facilitate that freedom. It's just so perfectly expressed, and I have had to think about it a little bit more recently. I mean, just before I started this, I was talking about, that I've had to ask. I felt that it was appropriate for me to ask for support from those of you who benefit from the work I do. And so all of a sudden I have income of a notable nature that's not just coming through a salary. And I've had to talk to an accountant about how do you deal with expenses and all these different things. I just have had, as I mentioned earlier, I've had blissful freedom until just a few years ago. I've had blissful freedom from all those practical details. It's not that I have no sense of money or prosperity. I have good money karma, and I'm a good fundraiser, which means I have an intuition about money, but I've just never known what you do with the nuts and bolts of it. But it's time to grow up, so I've been doing that. But this statement here, and I think very recently in one of these discussions, I was talking about Swamiji, and I was talking about how when we were all really impoverished, he was impoverished too, but he was impoverished on a higher level. and he would, that's what someone once said about Ananda. Ananda, it's not that we actually have any more money than we used to, but there's just, we're going bankrupt with more zeros. It's just, everything just keeps going from 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 because the enterprise is bigger, but we're still just running right on the edge because we have so much creativity and so much enthusiasm for doing what we're doing that we don't take the safe course. We just push it as far as we can push it if we feel God telling us to do it, which is exactly what I was saying earlier before I officially started right here. But Swamiji would always had more. His house was bigger. He had a generator to have electricity. He eventually built a recording studio. I mean, all these different things happened. But none of it was done just to have it. It was always done because there was some way that he needed to serve, and he needed these things in order to be able to serve. And if one looks at one's own life, you can easily tell the difference between spending money and buying things, because there's a hope that the mere act of spending money and buying things will give us a certain amount of satisfaction, as opposed to doing it because it's a means to an end, and that end is a generous one. Now, don't misunderstand me. Swamiji himself was, he wasn't austere. He was very conscious, but he did the needful in the moment that it was needed. He would travel. We would often stay in very nice places. He didn't hesitate to go to a nice restaurant and have a nice meal. If he saw a beautiful shirt in a store, he wouldn't. His first question wasn't, can I get it cheaper? He wasn't an optimizer in terms of dollars and cents. He was always in a flow. And it was kind of a joke, actually. I whenever he wanted to buy something and he wasn't sure whether he should or not, he would always find me. Like sometimes you see, we'd go around with Swami and there would be like 10 of us going around with him. Whether we were on holiday or in some other country, or when he would come here, we would always go to the Stanford shopping mall. The Stanford shopping mall is a beautiful place. The gardeners come in at every season, and they have all these beautiful flower beds, and the flower beds are tended at night, so they're always fresh in the daytime, and from season to season they change. It's a very attractive place. Increasingly in the last decade, the price tag of the things in the stores have just gone way up. It's super high end now. It didn't used to be so high end. It just used to be a nice shopping mall. And there was a travel store and various things Swami liked, and a little restaurant, a little coffee shop. So we would often go to the Stanford Mall. So why am I saying that? Oh, but so there'd be a whole group of us often wandering around, and Swami would go into a store. He didn't enjoy it if we hovered. So we would all just dissipate and window shop or do whatever we were doing. But whenever Swami wanted to buy something, especially if it was a little bit extravagant, he would always find me and bring me over. And he would say, should I buy this? And I would always say yes. And that's why he would ask me. Because I invariably said yes. It was a joke. It wasn't like I had any great judgment. It's just that I would always support him. And it was generally that, and it wasn't actually so naive. I mean, if it was hideous or useless, of course I would say no. But if it had some reason, I would just support him. I always had a very strong sense of the flow of energy and money, and if it was appropriate. And I mean, half the time, we would buy it for him if he really wanted it. In fact, it got to be kind of an issue because he would say he was afraid to admire anything when he was with us because we would always buy it for him. I mean, Swamiji gave us our lives. The whole Ananda life was because of Swami. So if Swami wanted a leather wallet or a beautiful silk shirt, I mean, it's like, thank God we can give something back to him. There's so little that we could give back to him compared to what he'd given to us, that we took, and I say we, it's like Ananda Palo Alto itself, myself and the money that was under my influence and David's influence, we would just spend it for Swami if we could possibly find any opportunity. We had serious discussions about him because he said he didn't like to touch anything for fear we'd buy it. And we kind of had to come to an agreement, that he didn't have to always accept when we offered, but we would always offer, etc., like that. But how do you define that as simplicity? You're going out to this mall here, you're going to, we never went into Neiman Marcus, but we would go into Nordstrom's. I mean, that was sort of Neiman Marcus we never went into. For those of you who are American, Nordstrom is a very nice store. Neiman Marcus is a very expensive store. So we would go into Nordstrom's, but not Neiman Marcus. But how is that simplicity? The simplicity of it was partly that he never accumulated. It wasn't like like if he had 10 shirts that 15 was better. If he had 2 pairs of shoes, 7 pairs of shoes was better. It wasn't that he just liked to accumulate. He never spent money to make himself feel better. He never spent money thinking that this will really make me happy. He would spend money if something was just a really fine object. And sometimes he would do it just to admire. And he would often do it to support an artist. If there was an artist or a craftsman, especially if he was buying or in contact with them personally. And this would happen also in other countries. You know, that you go to an art gallery or a clothing store or something like that, and he would be in direct contact with the person who made it. And Swami had a commitment to artistic self-expression. And if he also really felt in a person, or even a person who was running a shop, that it was a person whose life he wanted to support, then he would also spend money in order to support them. See, these are all principles that I myself have absorbed over time from just watching, you know, sort of how he used it. And he also felt just comfortable, which is like, I'm just going to do this for myself. I just want to. Now, right now I'm holding my red cup, but last week I was holding up my glitter cup that I bought for my birthday for myself. And it was, it was handmade, so it's more expensive than an ordinary cup. But now that I think about it, I bought it because I liked it. But I also bought it because I could see that it was handmade by a person who really put their name on it and had a picture, Daniela. And Daniela, there she was. And I admired Daniela because she put her energy out and created something, and it was something that I hadn't seen anywhere else. And she was trying to be a creative person and offer beauty into the world. And so I paid twice as much for a cup because it was going to Daniela, and I was really happy about that. So its simplicity is you're doing the things that facilitate what your higher goal is. Friendship is a higher goal. Beauty is a higher goal. Artistic expression is a higher goal. Now, if I myself was trying to change my mood and make my life better by spending money and having a glitter cup, that's a little something to be concerned about. Because then I'm using money and using material things to try to solve a different problem. But again, once again, just living my life. And it's very interesting because I realize, and this is just like yesterday, in Palo Alto where I live, and there's so many people who are always moving around all the time, and there's just so much stuff. When I was younger and I heard about like depression coming, master's predictions and so on, I would think, but there's so much stuff. I mean, how could we ever be poor with all this stuff around? But I forgot about flood, fire, nuclear war, where lots of stuff can be vaporized. But at the present time, we're just living in abundance. I'm always thinking how to improve. Just yesterday on the street, right near our temple, I saw a table, a very nice table, that was just a little better than the table that is presently in one of the rooms in this house. So I solicited a stronger person than I, and we took the table, and now I've measured, and now a perfectly good table is going to go out of the house, and a better table is going to come in. But the reason to do that is that it's going to make everything work a little better. We're going to have a little more freedom in the house. And so that's what we always have to be asking. But freedom is also beauty, because it's nurturing. It makes everything that you're doing more fun. And in the room that I live in the last couple of weeks, I've substituted small pieces of furniture for better pieces of furniture. In my case, either secondhand or free, because as I was saying, there's so much stuff around, it's just sitting out on the streets. Oh, if I substituted that for this, then the whole room looks a little better, and I have an extra drawer, and it facilitates what I want. But the net result is not bondage. The net result is not more to take care of. The net result is not, well, to use my favorite and practically only feng shui concept, blocked qi. Blocked qi is when the energy doesn't flow properly. And when one gets sensitive to it, because the shift I made in my room the other day was because there had been this little table there, and it always looked wrong. I don't know, it just always looked wrong. But it was a nice little table, and I had gotten it free off the street too. But when I substituted one free piece of furniture for another free piece of furniture, all of a sudden it looked better, the energy flowed better. So it's not wrong to be attentive. And sometimes people are deliberately inattentive in the name of being a spiritual person. I think in these broadcasts not too long ago, I talked about the transition point where I had lived next door to Swamiji, and then I moved to another part of Ananda, and then Swamiji suggested that everything had shifted at that point. The monastery had dissolved, most of us had gotten married, everything was different. Swami found himself alone, virtually, on the Ayodhya property, so he started inviting people to move back, and he invited us to live next door to him. But it required that we construct a small house, because the only dwelling that was right there was just impossible for various reasons. It went beyond simplicity into a level of poverty that did not create freedom, that was not functional. So living at that level was below simplicity. It was moving into poverty. It did not create freedom. So that Swami, this was a trick. Swami said, well, you can earn money by traveling and teaching, and which is how he kicked me out of the nest, basically. It's like he dangled one thing that I wanted in front of me with one thing I didn't want. And the two of them fought against each other. And the result was I went on the road. And for the next 5 years, my primary job, when I was at Ananda Village, I worked in the guest programs. But my actual real job was that I left Ananda Village and I traveled mostly on the West Coast. And just did master's work. I did exactly the work that I'm doing now, but I did it on the road. Just sort of, it was a traveling circus instead of a one place. But the end of that, the reason I did that is because I wanted to move next door to Swami, and I had to borrow money or had to get money in order to build a small house. And I could just get it by going out and teaching. So there it was. Swami just spun that one absolutely perfectly, and it really unfolded. However, now I was going to live in a nice house. Oh dear, does this mean I'm still spiritual? And so my job was for a while, what I did was I tried to sabotage the building of the house. The house would be built, but I thought it would be better if it was ugly. Because if it was ugly, that would show that I didn't care. Swami's response was, you don't get out of karma by doing it badly. I mean, you see, these are other principles of simplicity. You don't get out of karma by doing it badly. You get out of it by accepting it, by seeing what it asks of you, and by not resisting. Resisting is not freedom. Now I have to say that in the right way. Being afraid of it, that's the words I'm wanting to use. Being afraid, like, I can't have a nice house. And it was a pretty complicated psychological moment for me. And how much of it was my own inner, my own inner feeling, and how much of it was my fear of how other people would perceive me. And the whole thing was just playing itself out in lots of different ways. And there was a strong element of myself, which is like, I know that I'm a spiritual person because look how poor I am. And I thought, like, where does that come from? And then I had to look at Swamiji, who was living simply. He was living simply because he was living only with what he needed to do the work that Master had given him to do. He didn't clutter up his life with anything more. But he was completely fearless about doing the needful, whereas I was totally neurotic about doing the needful. I just was afraid to step into the demands of my own life. This is the work that I've been asked to do. This is the context of what that means. I mean, and it came out in a whole lot of other ways. I was even then a female person, which you might have suspected could be true. Nowadays, I know people shift genders, but I have never shifted genders. I was born this way, and I still am. So as a female person, first in my 30s, when I started, I was in my mid-30s, early 30s, when I started moving beyond Ananda Village. Ananda Village was its own enclosed culture. when I started moving beyond Ananda village, I had to present myself with a certain dignity. And for a female person of that age, that meant things like who cut my hair and how did I wear it? You know, what did my dresses look like? Just stuff that at Ananda village, when I was really poor, I never had to think about any of that. And all of a sudden, I had to present myself in such a way, as Swami said, that people would take you seriously. As he said, and this was something he did for all of Ananda. I wrote about this in Light Bearer, year 77, year 78. He said, Ananda has to present itself externally at a sufficient level of refinement that people will appreciate that our ideas are also refined. And this, again, this is America, but India is becoming the same too, where it's our ideas we want people to respect, but if we ourselves are too inconsistent with the refinement of our ideas, people will be less inclined to take us seriously. So I, as a female person, I had to learn to dress in a way that presented me with dignity and with energy, with not tamasic energy. I had to neutralize that whole issue. And I'd never paid any attention to that. I was pretty bad. Just as a female person, I never took myself seriously as a female. That's all. At some point during that, we had a store that sold a lot of beautiful women's clothes, and they had a fashion show every year. And just my friend was running the store, and she asked me to be one of the models, so to speak. I mean, it was a pretty small potato scene, but it was the first and only time in my whole life that I ever did anything just because I was a girl. And it was just like, it was such a comedy for me to just like, there you are. And I see the pictures and I think, wow, she looked pretty good. Clothes were good. But it was still simplicity because there were profound psychological blocks inside me against all of this. And all of those blocks were preventing the free flow of my energy. So to put on makeup and jewelry and these beautiful clothes, and not just the fashion show, but even just to wear all that stuff, because it was a necessary part of the service I was doing, and there was less freedom for me in not doing it because I was blocking the flow of energy. So these are very specific personal stories that not everyone has to deal with. But simplicity is the free flow of energy in order to be able to fulfill your dharma, in order to be able to fulfill your highest dharma. And it's not a matter of what that form is. It's a question of whether or not the energy flows freely or the energy is blocked. Very much worth thinking about and super subtle. I mean, not at all what I started out with, because I stepped into the spiritual path at the time when Ananda was absolutely impoverished, and that just suited me to a T. I grew up in my biological family. We were very comfortable, but we were just not materialistic. It just wasn't the way my parents were, and I just slipped right into it. It seemed perfectly wonderful to me. When I got to Ananda, we're completely impoverished. Oh, this is just great. I recognize this. I know this. I go somewhere, I don't know where I was in Europe, and there was some little monastery. There was a tiny little cave where the nuns used to live, where the monks used to live. I mean, they practically had to carry me out of there. I was just gripping the stones, like this is my home. This little water spigot outside in this little stone room. I loved it. Just like, this is me, but not now. So clinging to that, even though in every way I could justify it spiritually, it was not what was being asked of me now. Simplicity is a greater state of freedom. It doesn't matter what you have, it's why you have it and how you're using it. And this is the first principle of the Ananda way of life. God bless you, my friend.